Okay, students, so I wanted to break down how to write a good conclusion and just sort of expand on those thoughts that you read in the article by Grammarly. So conclusions are pretty important sometimes, but often I find that's something that students aren't quite sure what to do. And that shows in the writing, because that is a common occurrence to get a paper where it is a common occurrence to get a paper where the student, has an engaging introduction, makes all these good points, and then just ends it. It's an abrupt ending. You're like, what happened? So I like to think about it as if, when you're on a plane, if you're flying on a plane, you don't just go from, high altitude above the clouds to suddenly you're at low altitude, you're landing, you don't just drop straight down, right? You have a gradual descent down to the runway. So that's, if you think about why that's important, that helps get you acclimated to, a lower altitude, helps you kind of wrap up what you've been doing, right? And gets you ready to go to the next thing. So for those reasons, a conclusion is really important in a paper. And in fact, I would argue the conclusion is really what the rest of the paper has led up to, right? This is you making, your main point as backed up by all the evidence that you've already done. So in that instance, it's almost the most important paragraph in the paper. No pressure though, right? So there's a couple of things that you want to do in the conclusion. You want to restate your thesis. You want to summarize your main point. If you brought up some sort of hook in the beginning, you want to connect to that again. So, for example, if you talked about a story about, your brother really liking a certain book in the introduction or something, then you bring up that brother again in the conclusion. That's maybe not a good example because you don't often have personal examples in academics, but if it's something that you brought up in the introduction, you want to bring it up again in the conclusion. And then you want to end with a clear final statement. That's what I'm talking about, that kind of ending thought. That's your argument. That's what your main point is. You want to make sure and leave your reader with that. Okay, so I'm going to just go over these one by one and show you an example of how I would do this. This is drawing on the idea that I'm writing a text analysis about the book, what is it called? A Room of One's Own. I did the introduction about that too, so I thought I'd just do the conclusion about it. So restating your thesis. So in that original introduction, I talked about how she argues for the support of women, right? So I'm gonna say it again, but I'm not gonna say it in the same words. I'm gonna rewrite it in a different way, bringing in probably some of the evidence I used in the paper as well. So Virginia Woolf argues powerfully with experience, logical reasoning, and vivid detail that what women now have is not enough to support them as writers. Okay. And then you're going to summarize your main points. So this is where I would actually just go back with a pen or pencil, print out your paper, or I guess you can go in and do comments, but just on each paragraph, write down what are you saying in that? What is the main point of each of those paragraphs? And then put that together as your summary, okay? So this is an example of what I did. I didn't actually write this paper, so that makes this kind of awkward, but I likely would have talked about, the experience of what she did in that book. So this is me kind of trying to summarize these main points that I had, okay? And this is going to be probably your longest section where you summarize all your main points. So the reason you do that in your conclusion is because you brought up so many good things and your reader's been engaged and paying and following along, but they've just forgotten. So you just remind them, hey, remember I told you this earlier, right? That's what you do with your summarizing your main points. And then connect to your hook. So you remember in the introduction I had a bunch of different ways that you could introduce an article about the Room of One's Own. So this one, I just picked one of those. This was the hook about, the fashions of the day. So I said, her musings have left us to feel that women may have enjoyed dressing up in the fashions of the day, but they did not appreciate the accessories denied them because of their gender and the related expectations. That's almost restating the hook a little bit as well, right? So yeah, like I said, I haven't written this paper, so I don't know how I would do that, but you just want to kind of remind your reader, hey, remember I started out talking about this. I'm going to kind of give you some closure about this now and bring that up again, okay? And then the most important part is ending with a clear final statement. So this could be a couple different things depending on the paper you're writing. So a call to action is a good way to end a paper. That's something that your reader should now say, think, or feel. Because of, or do, I guess is probably what I meant there. Do, think, or feel because of what you've just told them. Okay, so if you're writing a paper about the climate, and you want them now to recycle bags, then you would say that in your conclusion, right? This is not one that you would do in this level of academic writing, but as you get higher up in academic journals and master's programs and some things like that, one thing that they commonly do is suggest further research. So now that we've studied all these things, more research is needed in these areas. Okay, that might be something you feel like you can do, but that's probably more in advanced levels. So if that doesn't work, then that's okay. Then you're telling them what you think or feel about this without using personal pronouns. So you don't want to say, I think all these things, and now I think this, right? You want to make sure that you say something like, this is important because, not I think this is important because, right? Just because we don't use personal pronouns in academic writing. With our literary narrative, or if you're doing some essay writing, then you would end with a so what. So I've told you all these things. I told you this story. I explained these points. So what? Why did I tell them? Why is it important? Okay. And then another thing you can do is just give advice or offer a solution, right? So in the case of mine, imaginary paper I'm writing here, that one probably makes sense. I probably want to say, okay, what should we do now? Because we've read this book about how women authors are not well supported. Should we support women authors more? Should we read more women authors? Should we, invest in children's, literature programs? I don't know. Whatever it is, then that's where you suggest that, okay? Give the reader something to do with all you've told them. Okay, I'm going to skip this because I will include this on D2L, but I just talked about, the next few slides are just examples of what this would look like, okay? So what you think, the so what, and then your advice or solution. So the last thing I want to leave on is what not to do, okay? Number one, do not bring up a new point, okay? If you're bringing up a new point, you're not done with your paper, have that as another paragraph, and then your conclusion is, another paragraph. So I have here, don't wait to share your thesis until the conclusion. That is a strategy that is actually advocated in one of the textbook chapters. So I'm not going to say, I think it is hard to do, though. I will say that. So I'm going to leave that on here. You want to be sure, even if you do wait to say your thesis until the end, that your reader knows what you're talking about and that it's clear that you know what the main focus of your essay is. And I just find it's really hard for students to keep that focus and that clear idea without sharing their thesis in the beginning. So I would really stray away from sharing your thesis last unless you have a very good idea. Maybe talk it over with someone first at least. Be careful not to get too overly emotional. Like, I guess you kind of want to have this like call to rally, but you also don't want to manipulate your reader. I guess these last to that introducing new evidence. That's kind of new with bringing up new points. So that would be like, you can include a quote that sort of summarizes your main idea. That would be fine. But if you're saying, I'm going to include this quote and include a new idea with it, that's where you want to be careful about that. Ending too abruptly, that is a frequent thing that happens. Make sure that if you've done all these things where you've shared a summary, brought up the main thesis again, and are sharing a final statement, you probably aren't ending too abruptly. This usually happens when you're not sure what to do, so you just sort of say, okay, that's it, bye, shorter. You don't really have a concluding paragraph, I would argue sometimes. And then the last one is just, don't think of this conclusion as like not very important. It is important. It's you kind of leaving your reader with your final thoughts. It's, as I said before, probably one of the more important parts of the paper. So make sure and give it, that kind of the attention that would need for that. So, okay, let me know if you have any questions on this. That's it for now.